Alright, this is Chapter 1, Lesson 2, Classifying Life for 5th grade. What we're going to talk about in this lesson is how every organism in the world on Earth here is organized. Now, an organism we know is a living thing. Now, there are more organisms than you think. It's not just animals that you think are alive. You've got animals, plants, fungus, protists, bacteria. There's all sorts of living things in the world, but what we need to talk about is how to group them. So, first you got to start at the top. What do scientists do? Scientists classify things. Classification is the science of finding patterns. That helps scientists identify and study and group and name those organisms. Well, one classification system that's used today divides all these organisms into 6 major groups called kingdoms. A kingdom is the broadest group, which you can see right here. Okay, this means animals. Everything that you see in this section, they're all animals. But there's so much stuff here. There's a big difference between a grizzly bear and a sea star, right? So you have to keep getting narrower and narrower and narrower, okay? To do that, you got to group them by their cells, by their tissues and organs, organ system stuff that we learned in the previous lesson. Okay, so kingdoms are very broad groups. Big difference between all these animals. Okay, the subgroups underneath them are your phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then we get to species. The species is the narrowest group that you use to classify an organism. A species only contains the organisms that are very closely related. So in this case, a grizzly bear and a black bear are closely related, but they're not similar enough to be in the same species. Okay, so we narrowed it down to just grizzly bears. Okay. So again, remember the order in this classification system that we're using is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Kingdom is the broadest group. Species is the narrowest group. We're now going to discuss each group that organisms are grouped into. Let's start with our most familiar group, which is animals and the animal kingdom, which we've discussed in detail in previous years. The animal kingdom, we're going to divide them into vertebrates and invertebrates, which you can see again. Vertebrates are animals with a backbone. Your invertebrates do not have a backbone. Okay. From there, you know, in our vertebrate group, we've got mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibians. Invertebrates, you've got your worms, your echinoderms, your arthropods, your mollusks, your arachnids, your insects, your crustaceans, and so on. This is one of the only groups that are completely multicellular, meaning that the organisms in this group have many cells. Only 2 other kingdoms, which we'll talk about later, fungi and protists, have both unicellular and multicellular, but this one is completely multicellular. You're not going to find any unicellular organisms in this section. Animals do not make their own food compared to other groups. Like we know plants do make their own food. A big difference here is the structure of their animal cells, which we discussed in the last section. We know that animals don't have a cell wall. They don't have chloroplasts. So we're looking at those things. That's why it was so important that we learned about cells in the previous lesson. Okay, animals are capable of moving from place to place. Plants can't. They have to rely on wind and water and such. It's one of the largest groups. It has 11 different phyla, which is phylum, that belong to the 2 major groups, which are vertebrates and invertebrates again. The phyla again, is just the groups that we named: reptile, fish, amphibians, birds, and mammals. Those are examples of phyla. And the invertebrate groups, again, echinoderms, worms, mollusks, arthropods, and so on. Your arthropods are the largest invertebrate phylum, and that makes up your insects, your spiders, your crabs, lobsters, and such. Important information for you to know is that all vertebrates belong to the phylum Chordata. Animals in the phylum are called chordates. These are animals that have a supporting rod that runs up the length of their back. So vertebrates are chordates because they have a backbone. Okay? And a nervous system and a brain. And mammals are part of this chordate group along with fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. Mammals are the most familiar group that you know of. There's about 5,000 identified mammals, but they only make up about 10% of that vertebrate group, which is about 50,000 identified species. So that was a quick nutshell of animals. Again, remember, animals are grouped vertebrates and invertebrates with their different phylums, which you can see on the screen. Plants in the plant kingdom are divided into non-vascular and vascular plants. Vascular means containing tubes or vessels. That means more likely that they have a stem. Non-vasculars don't have that vascular tissue, so they're small and close to the ground. That includes your mosses and your ferns and such, as you see here. I would take that back. Vascular ferns are more vascular. They can grow taller. The big main feature that we discussed in the last section was that plants have a cell wall. That's very similar to what plants have in common with fungi. Fungi also have a cell wall. Plants and fungus can't move from place to place, and they don't have any sense organs. So, like you have a nose and eyes, and you have your senses. Plants don't have their senses. Okay, there's about 350,000 different plant species. They're all multicellular. They make their own food as they go through the process of photosynthesis. Again, back vascular tubes or vessels, they carry water and nutrients from the plant's roots up to its leaves. That's where we discussed our xylem and our phloem. Where the xylem takes water up from the roots, takes it up to the leaves, where the leaves use the sunlight to change. They combine the water with the sunlight to make sugar and glucose, and then they go back down through the phloem, and that can go up and down throughout the plant. That's photosynthesis, really important. Non-vascular plants don't have that tissue, so they tend to be much smaller. They remain close to the ground where they can soak up water directly. Those are your mosses, your hornworts, your liverworts. So, again, you've got vascular, non-vascular plants. You can divide them into gymnosperms and angiosperms. If you remember last year, Jim has flowers. Angie gets flowers, Jim doesn't, excuse me. So, angiosperms have flowers, and gymnosperms are your conifers, which don't. Okay? The fungus kingdom is very similar to plants, whereas most people think, hey, that's a mushroom, that's a plant. Similarities, but there's a lot of differences. Similarities include that they have a cell wall. Cells look a little bit similar, but they're different enough that they have their own kingdom. They're different because they obtain their own energies. Plants have to make their own food, but fungus get their food from other organisms. If you notice in these cases, in these pictures, mold is growing on the orange. It's sucking its energy from the orange. It's doing the same with the corn. That corn smut. It's taking energy from other organisms to get its food. Okay, most fungus gets that energy by breaking down dead or decaying plants or animals. For example, the mushrooms you see down here, those morel mushrooms, you might find them attached to a rotting log in the forest. They're going to break down the nutrients in that log and absorb the energy. Those nutrients can also be reused by other organisms. Fungus can live in almost any dark and wet place, such as a basement. You might find mold growing on bread or fruit or other food, like you see on the orange. Fungus can grow on the human body, causing itchy ailments such as athlete's foot. So make sure If you're ever in a public shower, wear shower shoes or something, because you don't want to possibly share fungus between each other, and then you have fungus growing on your feet, so be careful there. Fungus isn't all bad. Fungus can be used for good things. Yeast is a fungus. You need yeast to make bread rise, so if you like bread, get a little help from fungus there. Fungi is also the original source of medicines called antibiotics. So if you're sick, you need an antibiotic, think of fungus, because that's where they come from. Antibiotics save lives and destroy organisms that infect humans and animals all the time. So again, fungus is yeast, mold, corn smut. They obtain their energy from other organisms. Next section is the bacteria kingdoms. Notice I say kingdoms. We separate bacteria to two separate ones. So when you're counting up your 6 major groups, bacteria has 2. There's ancient bacteria and true bacteria. Bacteria are tiny unicellular organisms. Each bacterium is a single cell. It has no nucleus. We know the nucleus is your command center. These bacteria have no nucleus. They lack other organelles such as your mitochondria. If you remembered from our last lesson talking about that's your power plants that gives you energy. In the true bacteria, which is bacteria that we know from today, you can find that about anywhere and everywhere. You find it on your toothbrush, and your food, and your skin, inside your body. Some are harmful, some aren't. Some bacteria cause disease and infection, food poisoning, strep throat, as you can see from that streptococcus down there, causes strep throat. E. coli can cause some stomach issues. It's in undercooked meat. So, but others don't. Many bacteria live in you. They produce no harmful effects. For example, it's useful to some organisms. Cows, they can't digest grass that they eat unless they have the help of bacteria. Cow stores chewed grass in a part of its stomach, and then the bacteria in the cow's stomach break the grass down so the cow can digest it. That's a similar thing for termites. They rely on bacteria to break down wood when they eat it. Humans, you and me, we need bacteria for digestion as well. It's in our intestines. It helps us break down food, and it helps us produce vitamin K, which our body needs. So it's not entirely bad. The bacteria that lives in a cow's stomach, that's members of ancient bacteria, which is a different kingdom. Ancient bacteria is the descendants of the oldest living organisms on Earth. So we're going way back here. Most ancient bacteria you're going to find in deep sea vents, hot springs, extremely salty water, places like that. So again, bacteria is separated into 2 separate kingdoms, ancient bacteria and true bacteria. And it comes in rod-shaped, which you see in E. coli, a sphere-shaped, as you see with the Streptococcus, and a spiral shape, as you see with the Lyme bacteria. The next and last kingdom we're going to talk about is the protist kingdom, which most of us are familiar about because we've heard of amoebas. Like the bacteria kingdom, protists contain unicellular organisms. They're either unicellular or multicellular, and they make their own food or they eat other organisms. They kind of pretend to be like other groups that we've talked about. You've got plant-like protist, you've got animal-like protist, you've got fungus-like protist. Differences between protists and bacteria. Protists are a lot larger than bacteria. Hundreds or thousands of bacteria cells might fit in a typical protist. But they're still microscopic. A very large amoeba, for example, might be about a half a millimeter in width. It's barely visible with a microscope. So besides being larger than bacteria, they have a nucleus. Remember, bacteria didn't have a nucleus. Protists do have a nucleus and other organelles. Different from animals, plants, and fungus, they've got simple body structures. They lack specialized tissues. They don't have those sense organs. They're not like the other groups there. Typical protists, they have algae, amoebas, slime molds, Again, you got the plant-like, animal-like, fungus-like type protists. And they're like that because, like I say, algae is like a plant because it makes chlorophyll and makes its own food. Amoebas are like animals. They share characteristics there and obtain food by eating other organisms. Your fungus type protists like slime molds, they break down dead organisms to obtain food. So it's characteristics of other groups, as it's still a protist is pretending to be like those other groups. And you can see here in the picture showing you a little bit more in depth, showing you different types and examples and characteristics of those protists. We won't go into depth, but this is extra information for you. That's our final kingdom that we talked about. So the 6 kingdoms that you need to know are animals, plants, fungus, ancient bacteria, true bacteria, and protists. Now we're going to talk about one final thing, which isn't a kingdom, but it's important for you to know. The final topic of discussion will be viruses. And viruses kind of bridge that gap between what's living and what's not living. Viruses seem to be alive. They look like they're alive. Some people almost get them confused with bacteria, but they're not bacteria. They can't be classified in any of those 6 groups because they can't carry out all the basic life processes. The only basic process that a virus can carry out is reproduction. It can continue to make more of itself, and that's why a virus is not a good thing, because you can't really do anything to get rid of it, just like the common cold, but it can continue to grow and get worse and worse. A virus is going to enter the body of a living thing. It's going to take over some of those cells, as you can see here in this picture, and that's what's going to cause you to get sick. Common colds caused by a virus, and then you got your more serious diseases, chickenpox, polio, HIV, sneezing and coughing. Send that cold virus to another person. That's why it's important for you to always cover your mouth, or if you do sneeze in your hand, clean your hands really quick. You don't want to spread this virus. If that virus gets in you, then like I said, it starts attacking your body and your cells, and that's what's going to get you sick. Once it's inside your body, a virus is going to attach itself to the cell. It's going to take control. It's going to take over. Like we said, the nucleus gives orders. That virus is going to start ordering the cell what to do, and that's going to start producing more virus. And over time, it's going to become the cell's going to be filled with your virus particles. It's going to burst open and release that virus into other cells and cause infection and disease. So you really need to take care of yourself. Keep your hands clean. Try to be as clean as you can. Avoid viruses. So this has been our Chapter 1, Lesson 2 lesson over classifying life. We talked about classification, cells, and kingdoms. We talked about kingdom classification, with kingdom being the broadest, species being the narrowest. We talked about the different subgroups, including animals, plants, fungus, ancient and true bacteria, protist, and we also discussed viruses. If you have any questions about Lesson 2, please message me on Edmodo.